Hey everybody, good morning. Hope everybody can hear me and hope you're having a great Saturday. I'm running just a minute late, but it looks like all my numbers count. I don't see anybody joining yet, so I'm going to give it a minute and we'll get started shortly. I hope you're having a great Saturday. So you got a minute if you want to grab a quick cup of tea or coffee. And I was able to get a nice walk in this morning. Boy, it felt so good to get out and just get the body moving. I spend far too much time in front of a computer. I'll tell you what, at least at the moment. I spend far too much time in front of a computer. I'm sure some of you can relate. Hey, Marie, good morning. So today's topic that we'll get into again in just a second is boundaries with Christian loved ones. I do want to, before I get into it, I just want to make sure I'm clear, and I'll probably say this quite a bit over the next few weeks as I do these. For anyone that's new to kind of what I'm doing in these live streams, there will be an occasional live stream where it's like an interview. But the live streams where it's just me talking, I'm basically just going through some notes that I've had for a while. I've said this before, and I'll say it from time to time again, but it's interesting how life can sometimes just get so busy that you just can't get to the things that you really feel are important. And that's been the case in a pretty overwhelming sense with my to-do list of things that I've thought of for a while that I think are important to me. And so I've been writing them down in this Microsoft Word document for years. And it literally is like 1,200 pages long. Like every time I had, oh, that's a great idea, write it down. So for the last 5 or 7 years, I've been doing that, and I just haven't had time to get to it. 1,200 pages. It looks like I'm pretty dark right now. Let me adjust my colors here as I get started. 1,200 pages of ideas to go through. That's a lot. And so there's always new stuff coming in. So I'm excited. There's a lot to talk about. I also want to make sure I'm clear on a couple levels. Number one, I'm not a counselor. I've never claimed to be and never would. But if you need professional counseling, please make sure you get it. Please don't use this as a substitute, especially if it's on any level that's, really concerning, where people are considering suicide or they're just ultra depressed. I see this as a community roundtable. I say some things, some chat comes in, and people say things there. But this is not a replacement for professional therapy. Obviously, please don't ever see this as that. Know yourself well and know when it's time to say I need more help than just a YouTube channel or a Facebook group. Anyway, having said that, I'm excited that you all have been here for the last few days and weeks as I've been kind of changing some of the ways that I do this. I'm still doing the interviews. So if anyone has wanted to do an interview with me, please feel free to reach out if you haven't done so already. If you have done so, please give me time. I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of emails I haven't responded to. I will get to them. And I'm excited to get to some of the backlog and just see what's sitting out there of great stories for people. I'm also going to be doing a live stream pretty soon, with just talking through how to get ready for your interview. Even those of you that haven't reached out to me about an interview, I think it will be helpful just to think through how to really, get your notes on paper, get the ball rolling in your mind as to how to do a good interview. Again, not that I'm a professional, but I've done it enough times, done it hundreds of times now, that I've got some things that, I've seen work and don't work. So also one last thing, I mentioned this maybe at the end too, but next Saturday, not tonight, but this time next Saturday night, we're going to do a poetry slam, deconversion poetry slam. So dust off your poetry books if you got them from your time when you deconverted, or if there's something in your heart, think about it this week and write a poem. We'd love to hear it, as long as it's of course appropriate and yada yada. I'm not looking for any Christians to come on and share their wonderful poetry about how to love the Lord. But anyway, love to have you all share some poetry. And I'm doing 2 more live streams today. I'm doing one at 2:00 about how Christianity objectifies people, and doing an open mic tonight at 7. So if anybody just wants to come on and share something on their hearts at 7 p.m. Eastern, feel free. So anyway, getting into the topic today, I'm going to do the same thing as I always do. Just kind of go through some thoughts and some notes on my side, and then read through some comments of some great things that you all kind of say in response, either to clarify things I say, add to it, negate it if necessary. I had a teacher in Bible college who used to say at the end, so now that we're at the end, are there any questions, comments, or snide remarks? And your questions, comments, and snide remarks, if necessary, are welcome. Feel free to keep me in line. But setting boundaries with Christians is a big part of our journey, isn't it? When you've deconverted from Christianity, it's a big deal. It's a practical necessity. It's also really an emotional safeguard that we have to think through to maintain our well-being, our psychological well-being. There are some situations that are really intense, and you all have told me about them over many, many times. I'm so grateful that there are some diamonds in the rough where it's not that big a deal. Autonomy and self-respect can be, in some stories, very much a big deal, where people just say, look, it's your journey. I don't want you to believe apart from, you being convinced. And if you're really not convinced, I respect your journey. Best wishes to you. Other journeys, of course, are very, very, very different. Deconversion is a painful journey in and of itself, and it just gets compounded by the ways that people respond to us. By the way, I hate to be looking down at my notes. I know it's a lot easier. It's not nicer when someone looks at the camera with their eyes, but I do have a lot of notes, and I kind of want to stay on target and not get myself. I'm one of those people that can ramble. I'm sure you all know that, and it's a good and a bad habit. But I don't want to ramble myself into off the rails. So, deconversion does involve our dismantling our belief systems. Obviously, they were our old framework for everything, the framework we shared with our families, loved ones. We understood the world and our place in it sort of the same way. And when we deconvert, of course, we have these feelings of grief and confusion, sometimes anger, certainly loneliness, and we're reconstructing our new identity, our new belief system, if you have one, so to speak, but you're at least dismantling your old belief system. And for many of us, that is a very weighty experience. And it's compounded exponentially in so many cases by the very nasty reactions of those around us that we love, but are still completely committed to Christianity. And of course, Christianity is never, at least I shouldn't say never, but it's by and large not going to say we're the only way. I'm sorry. They're by and large going to say we're the only way. And we're not saying that we're one option in the room. We're not saying we're the best option. We're saying we're the only option. Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's really, really clear. Most versions of Christianity that I've been exposed to would say it's our way or the highway. And we know that people are genuinely caring about our souls, just like we genuinely cared about other people's souls. But again, just like we used to do, they still fail to respect our journey. It's a very personal journey. It's an intellectual journey. It's an emotional journey that we've undertaken. And without clear boundaries, a lot of times our interactions with our loved ones become very harmful, very toxic, and they can exacerbate how lonely we feel, how isolated we feel. They can invalidate us, and they can honestly cause psychological distress. In my particular situation, just to give a brief context here as we get started. Yeah, I'm a rambling man. I can be a rambling man. That's true. It's weird. I'm an introvert, so there's times when I love to be very, very quiet. I love my silence when I get it, and being quiet and introverted helps me to heal a lot. But when I get a chance to chat, I can be chatty. So I'm not sure if that's always good or bad, but anyway, getting back to the point. When I deconverted, my dad had already passed, and my mom was still living and still living. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman, still a firm believer as ever. We didn't talk about it much for the first, almost a year. It was just like Tim deconverted. Huh. And it was like the elephant in the room that we didn't talk about. We had one, and as far as I know, only one really deep emotional conversation. We've had surface conversations, but we had one deep conversation. It was again about a year, if I remember correctly, after the deconversion. We were sitting in a car, and I said, "Yeah, Mom, you haven't said almost a word to me about my deconversion. Like, where are you with this thing? How do you feel about me? You sent me to Bible college. You paid for it, by and large. You sent me to Bob Jones and Lancaster Bible College, and you were an encouragement when I went to New Tribes Mission. You were an encouragement when I was involved for years in church. Where are you with everything?" And you could see the tears well up in her eyes, and she was very honest. And I could tell that this is too intense to do this much. This is going to hurt. Like this is probably a one-off conversation, and it has been. this hasn't duplicated since, but she welled up with tears and she said, I wish that I had never been born. Not me, but her. She herself said, I wish I'd never been born. I said, why? She said, because I brought a child into the world and he's going to burn in hell forever. If I hadn't been born, then you wouldn't have been born. I wish I had never existed. She's never, recanted that. But that's obviously a huge weight that I've effectively put on her, not by choice, of course, but it's a huge weight on her. And it's a huge weight on me to think, wow, my mom wants to die because of me. That's fun to think about. What a horrible, horrible thing for everybody to say. And I'm sure some of you could say much, much worse, where it's like, not only do I think you're going to burn in hell, but also I'm not talking to you anymore. Some of you have said that in your interviews. I had one gentleman in New Zealand who said his son, he deconverted, I think, when his son was like a late teenager. And then his son has since grown up and married and has a child. And the dad is not allowed to talk to him because they're JWs. And he's like, I don't know my son. I don't know my grandson at all. Anyway, going back to using that as just a bouncing, launching pad for why boundaries are so important. And I wouldn't say in my case that I've had too many boundaries that I've needed to put up with my mom, just because it's more of like let's just not talk about it. It's too painful. So, but some of you have talked about how these things do come up in your conversations, where they do end up aggressively wanting to talk about it. So I'm going to go through some thoughts here, and then I'll look forward to your comments and responses to this, and maybe adding hopefully some even better thoughts than I come up with. When someone leaves Christianity, like myself and you, we're doing that after this long period of reflection, of study. I studied a lot of Greco-Roman mystery cult kind of stuff, a lot of soul searching, as if we had a soul, but we didn't make the decision lightly. And then we made this huge, massive shift, significant shift in our understanding of the world, of eternity or the lack thereof, of this God, the God character or the lack thereof, how we understood ourselves, how we understood our past, where we'd been. But Christians who are still in it, they're still deeply in it, embedded in it, they're not going to see it that way at all. And especially, I'm thinking of the fundamentalist Christians, and I know that there are some of you that would be very quick to rightly bring up the fact that there are progressive Christians who will take a different view on this. But I'm going to focus more on my journey, and a lot of the journeys that you all bring up to me in the interviews of more of the fundamentalist journeys. So again, that group is not going to see it that way. I mean, they're going to see deconversion as a crisis of your family, a crisis in your life, a huge mistake, play a watershed where you took the way wrong turn that's going to cost you forever. And it's certainly a mistake that needs to be corrected. And they're also concerned not just for you, but also for the example. Like if Tim becomes an atheist and we don't fix him, he's going to burn in hell. But also if he becomes an example and other people are like, he's an atheist and his life's okay. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not like he becomes some drug addict or, started sleeping around or this or that. He did everything. He kept his marriage vows. He didn't do drugs. His life is not, he's a nice person. He's a normal person. That could be an example to someone else to say, maybe deconversion isn't the worst thing in the world. And of course, to the Christians, it is. So they might insist on talking with you about these religious topics, questioning your new lack of beliefs, and they're going to try to save you from what they're perceiving as your spiritual danger and the danger to your families. Having said all that, again, my journey was a little bit different. I had almost nobody among all my friends and family that reached out. Almost nobody said, hey, Tim, let's talk. Almost nobody, that's another topic for another day as to why. That might be a good one to actually do sometime. Why do some Christians just basically walk away when you deconvert and say, we wash our hands of you, as opposed to you're burning in a house fire. I can pull you out. Some of you were going through months, if not years, of inner turmoil, and then you eventually deconverted and you decided to eventually share it with your friends or loved ones. And your friends basically responded to things like, I can't believe it. Number one, the weird ones, like you just want to sin, or you just don't want to bow your knee to God. You want to be prideful and your ego is taking over. But it's basically this message of, I can't believe it. I can't believe you're turning your back on God. Have you thought about the afterlife? Are you really willing, let's go to Pascal's wager. Are you really willing to risk everything If I'm right as a Christian, then you get heaven. But if you're wrong as an atheist, you get hell. There's so much at stake. Have you thought about this? Have you really weighed and counted the cost? And it feels like such a huge dismissal of your autonomy and your intellectual journey, and it reduces you and your experience and your decision to like, you're just confused. You've missed the boat in some way and you're confused. Let's get you back to square one. Let's get you back to the basics. God is God. He's on the throne. He demands holiness and perfection. You have failed, and you must have either punishment or a substitute for you. Let's get back to the gospel. And, as they have those conversations with you, and some of them are direct, some of them are behind your back. Yeah, Daniel, I agree that the Pascal's wager is a form of manipulation for sure. But I am going to do a live stream on that at some point. That's a whole big one. But if boundaries are not respected, if your friends and your loved ones continue to push these boundaries that you're going to have to start to create, you have to take measures to potentially limit contact or limit topics, or explicitly even go into like the boundaries and the consequences. Say, if you don't stop violating this, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to, whatever, if you do this, then this happens. We might take a break from the relationship. We might have to go to a period of silence. And so I'm going to talk more about some of those in a minute. But, just being very generic at first, we'll be generic and then zoom in. This is important. Boundaries are important because you're protecting your right to your own beliefs. And in light of the contrast, you've never had your right to your own beliefs for your entire life, most likely. It's always been an implication. You must accept what your parents and your church has taught you. There's the implication that if you do walk away, that we have the right as Christians to impose on you and subject you to repeated questioning, judgment, to persuade you, to say you owe us a huge explanation. And Abraham Piper did a great job. I know some of you know exactly what I'm about to say. Abraham Piper, I think on TikTok, did a great job a few months ago talking about how you don't owe anybody an explanation. You can walk away and just say, I walked away and I don't need to say anything else about it. I'm not a Christian. I don't have to defend myself. That's something that they weave into the manipulation part of it. You can't leave unless you defend it. You have to give us all, 100 answers to 100 great apologetic questions. Otherwise, you're an idiot and you're a fool who said in his heart there is no God. A lot of you do feel pressured to justify and defend your lack of belief, and you feel more invalidated and inadequate than ever. Just give me 1 second. Tea with honey it covers a multitude of sins. You're going to set your boundaries slowly. And at first it feels like you shouldn't have to, but eventually you realize you do have to. But the goal that we're going to get into here is self-respect. And you let the other person stand firm in their convictions, but also they shouldn't be allowed to overwhelm you or diminish you by the fact that you disagree. And that should be obvious, not just with religion, but with politics and other topics, But we're here obviously to talk about religion. When boundaries don't get respected, some of you are going to have to go to a point where you're going to have to look at the people who are causing you this distress and take steps that range from low key all the way to drastic, all the way to I've blocked you for your mental health and your emotional safety. I think of it in some ways as this way too. If you had an abuser in your life, like an actual real life abuser, and let's say it's a wife that's been beaten by her husband and now they're divorced, and that man was the abusive man that was giving her black eyes and so forth, beating her up, he's now out of the equation in a sense, right? The divorce has happened, but he's got a friend. Say it's another married couple that you all knew together, and this married couple is friends with both of you. He's friends with the abusive man that gave you black eyes. He's also friends with you. They're also friends with you, and they're basically trying to maintain this relationship of saying, we see you in your claims that this man abused you and beat you up, and he's toxic and horrible. We see his claims that that's not true. But you're scared of him. You're hurt by him, and you're trying desperately to heal from all that trauma. And they're basically trying to actively or passively say, we want to keep this, maintain both, and we want to talk about him in a good sense. Oh, your ex-husband, he's getting a new job, and oh, he's doing this, he's taking the kids to the county fair, and oh, he's whatever, he's working out, he looks good. Like, I don't need to know those things. He is just the thought of him and the sound of his name brings up trauma, and you're trying to keep bringing up this conversation. With that in mind, think about Yahweh. I mean, Yahweh, we've talked about a lot on this channel, is how he's a psychopathic character. And so you have these people trying to basically say, we know Yahweh is to you a psychopath. He's an abuser. But we're going to not just keep talking about him, but talking about it. We're going to keep talking about him in a way that ignores everything you've said, to say he's not a bad guy. He's a wonderful father. He's a wonderful guy. And also to say, we really think you not only need to let us talk about him, but you need to come back to him. You need to get remarried to your abuser. That's what this is. That's what's happening here. When I look at that, over time, these kinds of interactions become so dreadful that you feel torn between maintaining those maintaining those family ties, and you need to protect your mental health. I'm going to go into some types of boundaries, and then I'm going to give you some specific suggestions and I don't want to over simplify this and say this is easy. If you just follow some ideas that the community comes up with, you can do this easily. This is not easy, and this is not as simple as, now that I have some ideas on my plate from a Facebook group or YouTube video or whatever. I mean, even if it came from a counselor, directly from your counselor, just having ideas doesn't fix it. So I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I know some of these are very, very nuanced situations. But the types of boundaries I'm thinking of first are topic boundaries. Some of you are going to have to state to people there are certain discussions that have just become off limits. I have people who would say to me, and this is a little bit different, but I'm just going to use it out there because I think a lot of you would relate, would say, what is your problem with Donald Trump? He's done so much good for our country. What is your problem with him? How can you possibly object to him? Look at his presidency. Look at the numbers alone. What a great man. And he's pro-life. He's this, he's that. What a great man. What is your problem with him? And you have to be like, I'm sorry, but Donald Trump's off the table. If you're going to try to shove him down my throat like that, Donald Trump's off the table. I'm not going to go down that road. For other people, other times, it's going to be much more specific religious beliefs, such as, you really don't think you have a sin problem? You really don't think you have a sin problem? You really don't think, I mean, you look at a child. A child will whack and smack the other kids for their toy. You really don't think we have a sin nature? Really? Kids are born criminals, and they need us to redeem them by our culture and eventually redeem them through Christianity. They're born criminals. They're born ready to murder each other. You really don't think we have a sin nature? And eventually you have to say, I'm sorry, but our relationship is going to have to focus on other topics, and other aspects are going to have to be the main point. Religious topics sometimes have to be limited or completely taken off the table. Also, you have to kind of feel out what's going to constantly turn into a debate. And there are people that just love to debate. There are people that are very good at it. There are people that have a very apologetics perspective. They can debate like crazy. They could do it even publicly. And they're going to make you feel like you're under constant scrutiny or attack. And there's people that are really good spin doctors. They can spin things to the point where you're just like, yeah, maybe. I mean, I look at some of the stuff coming out of the Creation Institute. How in the world do you think life evolved from the Big Bang? There's just no way. Life tends to, devolve. The second law of thermodynamics and all that. And they're gonna send you 1,000 videos from Ken Ham. And what's his name? The other guy, dinosaur guy. They're going to send you all these videos. They're going to make you cringe, but they're also going to send you things from Christians who are scientists, and they're going to say, if like you're not willing to look at the truth, and you might say to them, like, I've already looked at this stuff. I looked at this stuff for years. I know their answers, and I've also then looked at the other side. And it's ironic that a lot of times they don't want to look at the other side with you. They want to only send you their videos, their blogs, etc., and they don't really care to look at your stuff. And that's part of the issue here, is that, and we can be guilty of it as atheists or agnostics, that both sides are probably in some ways putting their fingers in their ears and saying, it's not worth it to me. Your information is not worth it to me. And that's where you have to admit to yourself, there's something else going on here. That some people are at a spot where they just cannot imagine the other perspective. And I've interviewed Jonathan M.S. Pierce from England a couple times. Great guy. Hope to have him on again soon. But he's talked a lot about the terror of what if you're right. The terror of, for a Christian, of, if Tim is right, then I don't have an afterlife and my life has no purpose. And like Paul said, I'm of all people to be most pitied. That's terrorizing to imagine. And so they're not going to go there. They're just not ready. And sort of, again, the Matrix example, some people just are not even close to be ready to be unplugged. And so you have to decide for yourself, is this a conversation that's worth having? Those topic boundaries. You have to, of course, add the emotional boundaries. There's going to be topics they're going to bring up, but they're going to be specifically emotionally charged. They're guilt-inducing. They're fear-based. Like, don't you fear hell? You've seen a thief in the night. You know the end times is, it's like every time I turn on the news, it's something else from the book of Revelation. Clearly the end times is coming to pass exactly as God said it would. How can you be so blind? Fear-based comments, guilt-inducing things. You realize that when you deconverted, so-and-so is watching. The other kids are watching. Your siblings are watching you. And they're asking questions, and their faith is in doubt. You realize what you're doing to our family, right? You're hurting us. We were, for the last 5 generations, we were a family of pastors and missionaries. Everyone bowed their head at Thanksgiving dinner, and they meant it. We were a Christian family. And you have brought about the first generation of our family walking away from the Lord. Do you realize what you've done? The guilt-based emotional manipulation. And your emotional well-being is now on the chopping block. These manipulative tactics that they're bringing up are going to bring up a lot of self-doubt in those of you that are kind of on the fence. Those of you that have not, in my opinion, necessarily deconverted in a healthy way, where you've kind of said, atheists feel like my people, agnostics feel like my people, Christians don't feel like my people, but I haven't thought through all the issues. And you're going to be kind of left in a quandary. You're not at a spot where you could create a platform and speak up loudly. That's not a slight. It's just like you're sort of in the middle ground. You still fear hell a little bit. You might fear demons a little bit. And if you're in that spot where you're sort of in the middle, they're going to be able to wring you out to dry, take you to task for this stuff. And you're going to feel very undermined and very manipulated by their fear-based comments. And there might even be, might be physical boundaries you have to set up, where I mentioned Thanksgiving or, Sunday afternoon lunch or dinner. These religious events and gatherings, they're going to become uncomfortable. And some of you have had to say, thank you for the invitation, but I don't want to attend your dinner because I know it's going to be all about Jesus. Or I'm certainly not comfortable attending your church service. Thank you for the invitation, but no thank you. I would love to, spend time with you in a different setting. But this is especially critical when these religious activities are meant to not just expose you generically to the Bible, but specifically to proselytize. You get invited to a crusade of sorts, to some kind of revival service. They know that the gospel is going to be presented there. It's a big deal. You have to remain in control. And that's what we've talked about control a lot on this channel and in interviews. You've been out of control. You've had your autonomy and your control taken away for so long, For the first time, you have to be able to take your control back. And it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. Very, very complicated, very complex. Communication boundaries is another one. Some of you share with me all the time, or I see it in a Facebook group, like, my dad just keeps on posting these Christian memes, whether it's about politics or it's about just directly about the Bible, where they're posting verses all the time, or even like the low level stuff, like I'm blessed. I feel so blessed by God today. And they want to bring up religion one way or another, actively or passively, directly in your face or sort of in a roundabout backdoor way. But you have to sometimes say, in one way or another, if you bring up religion again, I'm going to have to end the discussion or leave. And that's critical, because again, some of you are going to get distressed if you don't put that boundary up. You don't want to be in a spot where you are constantly in a position where you have to defend your beliefs or lack thereof all the time. I think it's important for you to be able to grow in your ability to talk to these topics, talk about why evolution is an accurate description of what's happened on this planet, the age of the earth, etc. Talk about comparative mythology, talk about the mythology woven into the New Testament especially. You need to be able to talk to these things and have resources for people. But you also don't want to be in a spot where every minute of the day you're just basically in the dock. You're defending your beliefs constantly. In the dock is not a good place for you to live your life. If you're not familiar with that phrase, it's like in the court defense chair. You don't want to spend your whole life in the dock telling everybody why you don't believe like them. There's going to be relational boundaries, in a sense, if I can call it that, where you want to say to people, you're my family, you're my loved ones, but I have mental health and my well-being to take into account here. I want to maintain my relationship with you, but it can't be harmful. And in a certain sense, it can't be unsupportive. I don't want to ever cut off my family if I don't have to. I don't need you to support my atheism, but I need you to respect that I have my own choice, just like I respect your choice. Now, I do want to take a quick 30-second or minute side note to this idea of respecting each other's beliefs. It's really, really hard to say to people, I respect your autonomy and your freedom to have your beliefs. Like, you believe what you want to believe, I believe what I want to believe. We just kind of agree to disagree. It's hard to go down that road entirely, because we would see a lot of Christianity as extremely abusive, psychologically abusive, especially to children. And so to say, I respect your beliefs, I want to, in my mind, give a clarification of, I respect your beliefs for what you personally want to believe. But if you're going to say, I do take that, I take my opportunity to believe what I want to believe, and I believe in Jesus Christ and the Bible, but I must teach that to kids. I must force them to believe like me. I do take issue with that, very strong issue with that. And that's hard. And that's where some of these boundaries are going to lead to you to say, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to part ways in some senses. And that's really difficult. You're going to have to learn to communicate clearly and, sometimes assertively, which is really hard for those of us that are more our personalities lend to trying to keep the peace. Being direct is sometimes very, very hard, because we want to kind of dance around it. We want to hope for the best, that they're going to really just kind of pick up the hints that we're not interested. But sometimes you have to be more direct. You might have to say things effectively like, I do feel disrespected when my lack of faith is questioned. And I'm eventually going to have to just say, I need us to avoid these discussions in order for our relationship to stay healthy. And that's hard because you're effectively saying, I realize there's an elephant in the room and it's going to stay there. But if we're going to have any chance at a conversation, we're going to have to leave it to the side. You're going to have to learn to be consistent. You can't be wishy-washy about this. And if a boundary is crossed, you're going to have to figure out what the consequence is. Again, I'm stating the obvious here, but if it's ending a conversation or giving distance to the relationship, hopefully it is temporarily, but you have to be consistent. Otherwise, the boundary is not going to really be seen as firm and reinforceable. It has to become a non-negotiable aspect. And that's again, not making light of it. It's these are hard things. You can't just say it. Oh, okay, we'll do that. Certainly, you want to find some people that can help you talk through this, friends and other family, hopefully, that might be willing to, that would agree with you, or that could at least support you in some way. Certainly your therapist or support group, if you can do that. You need guidance, you need validation through these dynamics. You need a place to feel like you're at home. And before, maybe your actual home or your parents' home was your home base, and you felt like, oh, when I'm here, I just kind of let it all out. I'm just, it's whatever, eat Doritos on the sofa, and you're, stocking your feet and watch whatever you want. No, it's you. It's you. You can just let it all loose. This is you. And all of a sudden, it's eggshells. You need a new home, and that's painful to admit, but you do need that. And of course, self-care is a big deal. You're going to have to protect your well-being, your mental, psychological, emotional, and if you want to call it this, your spiritual well-being. There's things like, of course, mindfulness exercises. A lot of us do. One thing I appreciate, I've said this once before, but the Luminate app. If you haven't seen the Luminate app, it's trippy. It's weird. There's at least like 3 or 4 free ones, so you don't have to pay for it if you don't want to at first. But the Luminate app is cool. You just show you. You're gonna bring up your phone, but you're not gonna look at the screen. Like you bring up the app, the Luminate app, but then when you're actually using the Luminate app, and by the way, I'm not advertising for them. They're not paying me anything. This is just my experience. But you're not going to look at the phone. You're going to look at the flash, or whichever one is the flash, and you put on headphones, hopefully noise canceling ones, and you close your eyes. Maybe get on your bed. It has to be like a quiet room where no one's going to interrupt you. Or you're going to be like, oh, but you get in the zone where you have the earphones on, and you close your eyes, and a voice starts to come on and talk you through this mindfulness exercise, and the lights flash, and it's sort of like a low level trip. It's really cool. You feel like you're going through a tunnel in space, so to speak. I'd recommend you at least try it. The Illuminate app is pretty cool. Of course, physically exercising, journaling, just being around people who are going to support you, finding some way to have affirmations in your life. So those, again, I've kind of started with like some big pictures, and I've come to some big but zoomed in topics. I want to end with a quick list of some things that I think might be able to help. And again, this isn't exhaustive. This is just some ideas, quick hits. I recommend that you take some time to be very specific about your personal stances and your personal values. Clarify them. Understand yourself. Know yourself. What are your beliefs or lack thereof? What are your stances? What are your core values? I had one person in the last few interviews. Let me see, which person was it? It was, who was that? V. Marie. V. Marie, it was back on July 22nd. But she, at the end of her interview, did like her core value statement, like, who am I now? Clarify your core values and identify what aspects, so to speak, are non-negotiable to you, including practices, even rituals. What do you believe about your life, and what do you need to maintain for your well-being? We all need to learn, of course, to communicate that clearly over time to certain people. Some of it will just be obvious to them, but eventually we need to figure out, how are we going to choose these conversations? How are we going to communicate clearly about our boundaries and what we prefer, and versus what we're willing to engage in terms of debates or topics about our faith or lack thereof? I do encourage people to try to stay calm. Part of that is understanding that you just need to stay calm, because otherwise it's just going to make your heart race. But also to understand, sort of going back to the Matrix theme, it's like you're not really talking to them. You're talking to a parroted version of them. The best version of them, in my opinion, is the version that escapes mythology. You're talking to the puppet version, the version of them that's just repeating what the apologist and their pastor has said. You're not really talking to the true them. And that helps me to stay calm, because it's like, it'd be like talking to someone that had dementia, And, maybe they start bringing up, the name of a dog that they had 20 years ago. It's like, where's my dog? I can't find my dog. My dog's gonna need to eat soon. And you're like, I'm sorry, but Rover died 15 years ago. No, Rover's here. I just saw him. You're not going to get angry at that person. You're like, you can't mentally think through it. Something's happened to your mind where it's sadly at that spot. I'm not going to be angry at you that you want to talk to and take care of Rover. But I'm going to not respond in some anger at you because you do that. You're not your true self. This is a deeply emotional situation, but you don't want to escalate these conversations into an argument if you don't have to, especially if there's a way to foresee that escalations will like permanently damage the relationship. So try to stay calm. Try to develop on that note of thick skin, especially if you get public, if you develop a platform. Like, don't even think about a platform if you have a way to, if this gets to you. And I've said this before, but I think it's a good place to add this. For those of you that are thinking of starting a platform, number one, I highly recommend it. I'd love to have you be a coworker in the ministry. But at the same time, I do read stories sometimes where like influencers will find that they get comments and negative comments from people that literally send them into a depression and even become suicidal. If you can't accept bullying from Christians, don't create a platform. Christians are bullies, and I'm going to do a live stream on that before too long. Christians are bullies. Yahweh's a bully, so what do you expect from his followers? But Christians are bullies by and large, and if you can't take bullying from them, you do need to be careful. So for those of you that can have those conversations to some level, it is important to be able to bring up the topic of agreeing to disagree. And I've talked about how that's a little different when kids are involved. But you do need to be able to say, we're not going to see eye to eye on stuff. And I think sometimes you can bring in related conversations where you'd say, look, what if I was still a Christian, but you were a Calvinist and I became more of an Arminian? Or, you're more pre-trib and I'm post-trib or whatever. I'm mill or post-mill. We're still Christians that can still honor the Lord Jesus Christ. Still brother to brother, sister to sister, as it were. But we have some pretty significant differences and even practical stuff. I think we should baptize babies. I don't. I think that's horrible. I think it's a Roman Catholic cultish thing and has nothing to do with biblical Christianity. Well, I disagree. I think it's a crossover from the circumcision covenant. They were circumcising little boys, 8 days old, knowing these 8-day-old little boys couldn't confess their faith in Yahweh, but it's a sign of the covenant. And so I think, infant sprinkling, infant baptism is a sign of the covenant. And you're going to have these big disagreements. You're going to have to agree to disagree. It's just this is on a much, 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 much greater scale. But you have to try to pursue that if you can. Of course, you do want to try to be a good listener. And I think that's going to be make a big difference. If they feel like you're just putting your fingers in your ears and saying, you're telling me the fool said in his heart there's no God, but I also see you as you're an idiot, you're a fool because you worship a non-existent psychopath. Yes, both sides think they're true, but if you can get to a point where you can start to say, I need more than ever to listen. I need to hear. And sometimes I think that can backfire on them because, when you listen, they might kind of overtalk themselves to a point where they express the fullness of what they're thinking and they're believing, and you can suddenly find holes in the dam. It's like if you're an inspector and someone says, please inspect this dam, and you inspect one little, square foot of it, that may look fine, but if they're like, no, take a couple hours, inspect the whole thing. Oh, there's actually a little hole there. It's a hole there. As you're a listener, they might talk themselves into a corner. That is very true. And I'm not saying to say that because you want to be snarky to them and say, ha, gotcha. You don't want to do that, but you want to try to respect their beliefs, or at least respect their autonomy, without planning your rebuttal every second of the conversation. You want to try to foster that mutual respect. And it also, at the very least, could say, listen, I let you speak for the last 45 minutes and just share your faith with me. Now, can I take at least the same amount? Can you listen to me as to why I left Christianity? hopefully that will happen. You might need to limit some conversation topics. We talked about this earlier, but decide on which discussions are off limits to you, and just frame it like, look, I'm saying this topic's off limits, but I want to maintain harmony with you. If you're going to tell me I'm on my way to hell, we're not going to talk about this stuff anymore. But if you want to talk about generic religious stuff, I'm okay with that. But if you're going to keep telling me I'm about to burn in hell, we're going to shut the whole thing down. So you decide which one you want. Do you want a little bit of Jesus conversation and it's okay? Or do you want a lot of Jesus conversation with hell and then immediately it's just all gone? There's nothing left. You decide. You might need to set literal time limits for this, just to say like, look, I'll talk about it with you for a little bit, but I don't want every single time that I visit you, every time I come over to my parents' house, I don't want every visit to be God stuff. Sure, send me maximum, one email a week or one email a month, or if we talk about it, let's talk about it for 30 minutes, then just say like, that's it. That's it. Let's talk about the weather if we have to be real generic. Let's talk about, you're repainting your walls. Okay, cool. Let's talk about other stuff going on in your life. Don't be afraid to really frame it from your perspective, to say, I am uncomfortable. And a lot of us have struggled with that. It's because we're used to not focusing on what we want ourselves. Feels selfish. But don't be afraid to begin to frame this in the sense of saying, I need to decide, what do I want? And sometimes that conversation can transcend all these topics. You can say, maybe you're in a marriage where it's always been about the man's pleasure. The man needs sex, the man needs this, and maybe the wife needs to say, you know what, I have physical needs too. I need to tell you, my loving husband, that I do care about, but we're always focused on what you need. I need to be honest. I need some things too. I have whatever. I have this passion. I have this need. I have this boundary. I feel better when we do it this way. I feel uncomfortable when we do it that way. To begin to put yourself in that frame of mind, the I statements section of your mind, this sense of like, I just can't go there, or I must go here. And that's so wrapped up in autonomy, so wrapped up in it. And where so many of us have had our autonomy stripped from us for so long that's hard to start. But start to think of it as, what do you want? This, become the driver of your life. Take the drive. Jesus is no longer taking the wheel. Your parents and your church is no longer taking the wheel. You take the wheel. Try to respect their boundaries. If they have certain things that they're going to ask you to do or not do, try to respect it. If they're praying, I think about like Thanksgiving prayer again. If they're going to pray, you don't have to bow your eyes and fold your hands, or bow your head and fold your hands, but you don't have to laugh. You don't have to snicker. You don't necessarily have to leave the room, although some of you probably would do better if you did. Just say, I'll come after your prayer. But, you don't have to directly disrespect them. And, I think that's stating the obvious, but think through how the emotional distance is going to work. How are you going to look at your emotional health and say, just like I am coming at this, reclaiming my autonomy and saying, I need this to be healthy. Like, you really need to, in that dynamic, reflect on yourself and say, where is my emotional health? How am I doing? Where is the trauma with me? Do I get triggered by the littlest things? I think over time, the triggers disappear by and large. You're just like, I don't care. I've been in a church twice this month. I'll tell you why another time, but I've been in a church twice this month. That was really weird for me. I haven't been in a church in 5 years. But to be in two different churches twice this month it kind of freaks me out, it's not because I'm becoming a Christian again. Don't worry. It was relating to schooling issues and so forth for the kids. But I was in church twice. I was in church yesterday. Was it yesterday? Thursday. I was in church Thursday for like 3 hours. That was really, really weird. But, for some of you at the very beginning, that's going to be so hard. And you got to figure out your triggers. Look at your emotional health and be very honest with yourself. How am I doing? On that note, it might be important to give yourself permission to say, I don't need to cut so-and-so off, but I do need to take breaks from time to time. Just to say, look, I appreciate our relationship. I'm not saying never talk about Jesus. I know Jesus is important to you, but can we take a break? Can we say the next 2 weeks? It's just not time. Be okay with that. And that's the same way with any relationship. If you're going back to the marriage thing, if you're like, look, I love being sexually active with you. You're my spouse. You're my lover. You're my best friend. So there's some things going on, or I'm sick or whatever. Work is just beating the hell out of me. I feel like physically, where, there's some aspect of some other such part of my life. I just feel like I need to take a break for 2 weeks. Can we focus more on cuddling? That's okay. Take breaks from whenever you need to for your mental health. This is about your autonomy. And anybody that doesn't respect your autonomy, that will help you to also figure out who are your people. If you have people that say, where you say, I need to take a break, and they say no, that's a red flag. I'm going to try to wrap this up here, and I see some people, I see some things in comments that I'm kind of like half seeing but not seeing, but I will get to them very shortly. Try to avoid personal attacks. If you can, is a good suggestion. I think to just say, don't use words like idiot. If you can avoid it, don't say, don't bring up the bad words, especially. Don't try to curse at them. Personal attacks are not probably going to help too much. Now, I'm going to be very open about what I think Christianity does in general. I do think Christianity makes people into bullies. So I'm not saying there's never a time to be honest about the dynamics, but try to avoid turning that into, cussing at people and just really, really. There's times to say, I think you're wrong, but you don't have to say that in a way that where you're trying to make them cry, or you're trying to say that you're the worst person on the planet. Of course, know when to walk away. It's kind of touched on that a little bit. You might need to create actual space. When I say, I mean physical space. If you're at Thanksgiving dinner again, excuse yourself during the prayer. If the family's having a religious discussion, some families are so religious where you're the one non-Christian and there's 30 Christians. They're literally going to take time to sing hymns. I know some of you that might be like, what? But I know families like that where they will literally have 30 people get together and they'll have a little church service after Thanksgiving or something. You might need to create physical space to just be like, I'm going to go to a different part of the house, or I'm just going to excuse myself for that. If you're doing a hymn sing, it's time for me to leave. Then there's a few final real practical boundaries. You might need to have a boundary about texts or social media stuff. Get out of group chats if you have to. Develop a support network if you can. YouTube channel, social, Facebook. You need people where you feel safe. You need to have a safe space somewhere. Give me 1 second. You do need to practice the sense of the I statements, but you need to be just generally in your mind assertive. Be comfortable with the idea of declining things, saying thank you, but no thank you. I'm going to have to decline that service. Now, there's some things that you're going to have to do if you're going to go to a wedding or a funeral. It's going to be in a church most likely. You can't avoid everything, but try to figure out what you're going to be assertive about. I think it's important to try to avoid changing others in your mind and saying, I'm sort of mentally imagining that I can foresee, if I just say enough points, if I give you enough Matt Dillahunty videos, enough Seth Andrews, enough whatever, that you will deconvert. We know that is not necessarily the truth. There are people that we love that will never escape. They will be in this till the day they die. Their frame of mind is always, we want to change you back to a Christian. And if you're doing the same thing back to them, it's really hard to do it. But I think it's important for us to try to just love people as they are. I know that's a huge ask in these cases, to love people despite them being steeped in mythology and defending it. Even, some of you have parents that are pastors and missionaries, to say, I love you despite who you are, not necessarily because of who you are. But I can say there's a part of you that's Christian. There's also a part of you that's just you. It's a part of you that would that works hard. There's a part of you that loves to play tennis. There's a part of you that's a great painter. There's a part of you that just has a beautiful smile. Whatever part of them is them without Christianity, try to love them for that. Become increasingly aware of the psychological tactics that have been used, like we talked about yesterday, in church to get you stuck, to get you controlled, but also to recognize that manipulative behavior that's going to continue. Thinking in my mind at that point of things like guilt trips, trying to force you, as it were, into participating in something. Maybe, giving you, your Christmas gift as a book from a pastor. It's manipulative behavior. It's very passive aggressive in some ways, and you're going to have to decline if you can, or somehow bring your boundaries up to the forefront. Of course, establishing consequences is critical. You're going to have to, at some point, for some of these harder situations, say, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to end this conversation, and we might have to even end this relationship. And for those of you that have had to do that, I'm so sorry. I know it hurts. But in some cases, you literally have to say, I have a new family, and it's no longer connected by blood. I would say a big one to me is trying to acknowledge any kind of common ground. And this may or may not, depending on the person, this may or may not give you much bang for your buck, but try to talk about whatever shared values you can. Say, look, I still want to be kind. I still have compassion. I still care about so many people. In some ways, you might say, I'm more concerned than ever about charity. I'm more concerned than ever about helping those in need. We do have some kind of shared values here. And, that can certainly merge right into some kind of mutual respect and say, like, look, Mom, Dad, I appreciate the fact that you all give to kids that are hungry. I don't appreciate that those groups are doing it by way of also sharing the gospel with people and building up churches. But I appreciate the fact that they're at least saying, we recognize kids are starving and we're trying to feed them. So, give some kind of credit where it's due if possible. Again, I know it's much more complicated than I'm making it. I would say a big one would be, as you're thinking through these, try to think about them as early as possible. Don't make decisions at the last minute in the heat of the battle, as it were. Try to think about it like, okay, if these conversations continue, if this escalates, what am I going to do? Calmly. Think about the ramifications early, so you're not lashing out as you're heated in a conversation right over the kitchen table. So set your boundaries as early as you can, in a sense. Certainly go back to them, rethink them at times, and say, are things going well? Maybe things are going really well, or maybe they're going really badly. Maybe we need to change these here and reassess how intensely we do or don't need to keep them. Again, going through some notes here. Don't feel the need to justify your lack of faith. Just decide for yourself what's going to suffice. Say, I don't believe that. Why? I don't see it. I don't believe it. You need to be comfortable. I need to be comfortable with simply saying, I'm not necessarily going to explain it in every situation. And there's people that love to pull you in. They love to rope you into these conversations. One thing I would say too, just very practically, and this relates to not just these conversations, but anything, you will come across people who will try to get you engaged in endless conversations about all kinds of stuff. And they're thinking of it as they want, like if you're texting or emailing, they want your response to be pretty much just as big, if not bigger, because they want to feed, they're looking for the fodder. They want to feed off this and kind of make this conversation into a little war zone. My recommendation for anyone that you see that's very, very verbose and wordy and just wants to escalate these conversations, every response that you have, everyone is shorter than theirs. And if they continue, say past level 2 or 3 of trying to make it bigger, make your response half the size. So they give you 4 paragraphs. You respond with 2. They give you 4 paragraphs again. You give them 1. They give you 6 paragraphs. You give them 1 sentence. They give you 6 paragraphs again. You give them thanks, but I think I'm going to have to wrap this up. I've said my piece. There's nothing more to say. Always respond with less. Don't give them the idea that you're a sucker to be pulled into the conversation. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Know when to walk away. It's in some of these conversations, you have to diminish it. And that's true of anything. You're talking about work emails, you're talking about personal emails, anything. Always, your time is too precious. Always respond with less than they did. Let them know we are wrapping this conversation up. Everything. That's a rule that I put in my life for almost every conversation. We are wrapping this up. If we're talking about different viewpoints and antagonism, because you also don't want to you don't want to become their resource in their Google. You don't want to be like them saying, prove to me that the Earth is whatever billions of years old. Like, but there's 100 million YouTube videos about it. Why do I need to be the one to explain it to you? Don't waste my time when you can get your answers somewhere else. I don't need to be YouTube and Google for you. You go do it and then come back and tell me what you found. But there are people that will try to literally eat your time away. Going back to triggers for a second here, recognize your triggers. Recognize where your sense of peace and equilibrium is, and what knocks you off that equilibrium, and say, I'm got to be honest. When we talk about sending kids on missions trips, it really freaks me out. It upsets me. You're talking about colonialism. You're talking about, in many cases, suppressed and stealthy white supremacy. You're talking about the idea that we need to spend thousands of dollars for these kids to go see all this when we could just send the thousands of dollars directly to these poor people and feed them. There's triggers. You're going to have triggers. Be aware of those and figure out when you can and cannot talk about them. Stay true to yourself throughout this whole thing. Don't compromise yourself. Don't let them put you in the hot seat and say you need to constantly defend yourself. Learn to stand firm. I'm okay with who I am. I'm okay with the journey I've taken, and I'm going to stand firmer and firmer and firmer to the point where I eventually become comfortable again, even with bullying. Like, you can bully me all you want. I'm quite firm in what I do and don't believe. Not to say I'm not malleable in the sense of learning new information, but stand firm. And then sort of wrapping up where I started, get professional help, if you need it. If you know that these situations are so hard to navigate, you're struggling to figure out how to talk to your family, your loved ones, even your spouse, there's guidance that is available from professional secular counselors. Don't go to religious leaders. But there's people that can kind of offer support or maybe mediate in some cases, but for sure offer you support behind the scenes. Talk it through, find friends, and know that we as a community care about you. If anybody is unaware, if you're new to this whole thing and you're unaware of some of the Facebook groups where you can talk about these things and get help and encouragement, reach out to me. I'm on Facebook at Harmonic Tim. I can get you plugged into some Facebook groups where you can talk to people about these things and get that, at least that low level support. But yeah, definitely try to be open to professional help if you realize that things are going south really badly. I'm going to move to the comments in 1 second, but our conversations frequently go back to a couple key points. Your autonomy matters, self-respect matters, you're reclaiming your identity, your mental health, you're healing from religious trauma. You're not rejecting them, you're rejecting their beliefs. To mimic their statement, we love the believer, we hate the beliefs. We're also trying to protect our mental and emotional health here. We're trying to be authentic. And we're trying to get to a new level of rebuilding our lives. We are restarting. We're reframing. And just while you're dealing with people that are very difficult at times to deal with, whether it's snark, sarcasm, or any number of other responses, bullying, or just a frankly nitpicking, like, come on, Jesus, whatever the response is, you need to get to a point where you look back at yourself in a year or two and say, I love who I've become. I love the choices I've made. Dream about it. Think about, just like we dream about, I can't wait to get to this, take this vacation or get this car or achieve this goal. Envision your mental health in a year or two. Where are you emotionally and mentally? And take steps to get there, just like you would take steps to buy the car you want. I think that's critical. Anyway, I know that, again, in many ways, I am just scratching the surface of the surface of the surface, and this is not meant to replace, again, any professional. So I hope that some of these ideas that I've jotted down are helpful to you. I hope they trigger some more ideas in your head, and hopefully you can just get to a point where you can kind of make up your own list of what you think you need. Pick what you can, pick the good and leave the bad or the irrelevant. So I'm going to go to some comments here. So there's people that keep on asking a similar question. Who was the naked young boy that ran away from Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? I'm not sure if I can't remember if that's the same person, but I'm not going to keep answering that question. Just so you know, if I've answered that a little bit before, but I'm not going to keep answering it. You can certainly write it down there if you want to, but I have interviewed Dr. Ammon Hillman about it, and Derek and others have certainly interviewed Dr. Dennis McDonald about his perspective on who that was. My pay grade is not high enough to be that anyone should be listening to my opinion probably on who that naked boy was in the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus. I think it's very possible. Yes, I think there's possible that there were psychedelics involved back then in early Christianity. I think that's almost a given at this point based on some of the evidence. Was what was happening with that boy? Was it the lace taste, as they say, with that garment? I don't know. I would say it's not a question though that's probably best for me. I'm just not a scholar enough to be able to answer that well. So thank you for asking, but I think that's probably the last time I'm going to address that in any way. See here. Accidentally Agnostic says God should have probably paid Mary's father however much money according to his law and marry her. Yeah, for sure. Amy Collins says, do you think it's possible some Christians deliberately enjoy being sadistic and retain their religion as it gives them a moral permission to be mean? That's a great point. I might even honestly at some point use that as a launching pad for a discussion. I'll have to think about that and jot some notes down about where that could go. But I do think it's possible. I think there are some people that are truly, we all can know or imagine somebody that's like just the little old grandma. Just, oh, bless your heart. Come have some apple pie, sweetheart. I just love you so much. And you're just like, that person isn't sadistic. They just want to love on everybody. They're just a great big hug, and they're just a great big mess of syrup and chocolate. They just love you. And they're not going to talk about hell. They're just like, oh, my preacher said something nice, and if you want it, you want it. If you don't, you don't. I love you either way. Those people are just beautiful. And I know some of those people, and they love you to death. Down here in the South, we have a lot of them. There are some things I think they're intentionally ignorant of that is kind of sickening that they'd be ignorant of things on purpose. But yeah, I think in the mix of all those very nice people that mean well and are very, very much putting the blinders on as to the horrific things that they're standing behind, I do think there are some people in the mix that are sadistic and are trying to be lording it over you and be able to give themselves a way to say, like there's people that I know people that would say, if I were in the Bible times, I would have stoned my kids to death. If I were in Bible times, I would have picked up a sword and slain the Amalekites. And I'm kind of still hoping that God sort of calls me to take up arms in this country. I know people that want to take up arms. There is a church in Pennsylvania where they invite people to bring in their AK-47s to church to kind of show off. There's some really nasty, crazy stuff out there. And I'm sure that some of them are doing it on purpose. They're not trying to be, all bless your heart kind of Christians. They're trying, they want to take over. And that's very, very scary. Whether it's on a religious, political scale or they just want to dominate your life. See here. Palestina talks about always take your own vehicle when meeting someone or going somewhere. That's a good point. If you're being invited to church, if you can, take your own vehicle or at least take your phone with the Uber app on it and or Lyft and be able to get out. You don't want to be stuck in a church for 4 hours if you really, thought it was going to be 30 minutes and thought it was going to be something different. So great suggestion. There's a couple comments on Calvinism. Calvinism is false, period, by John Howe. I'm not sure how far that conversation went, but I'm going to keep going. Some people are talking about movements about taking America for God. Yeah, it's very sad. Christian nationalism is alive and well. And I think a lot of it, like I've said, is this masked white supremacy. But not all of it, but I think some of it. Accidentally Agnostic says the Bible fits into the mythology and fiction written in its day. Yeah, it really, really does. Very, very much so. Invisible Jesus says, I was in the JW cult, and the constant, subtle narcissistic abuse woke me up, and I told them where to go. Yeah. Yeah, it is very much narcissistic abuse. That's a great point. Chick Magnet says, studying the facts of what is behind Yahweh and Christianity. Yeah. A great video for that, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know it. I'll actually just put it in comments here. But a great video to come up with is seeing through Christianity. And I know some of you have heard me say that before, but with Bill Zercher, great start. It's going to not necessarily go as deep as some of you might want to in the long run, but it's a great start. So seeing through Christianity there in the comments. Let's see here. Allie Bree says, my mom and I went 10 plus years not talking about my loss of faith. She didn't bring up religion out of respect. I realized I never got to explain to her how religion hurt me or why I left until recently. Yeah. It's a hard situation. Very hard situation. Day of the Jackal says Christianity is mythology, but it's nowhere near as good as Greek mythology. I mean, it's based heavily on Greek mythology. I think part of it's different is that it's written from certainly a Judeo worldview in the sense of, it was written in Aramaic, or not written in Aramaic. It was written by people who were clearly aware, who spoke Aramaic or in Aramaic books. They were clearly copying from both Greek mythology as well as the Hebrew Bible. So you're talking about people that, whether it was one group of people that knew all the different sources or different groups that kind of added their pieces to it, it's really clear that they're copying from the Old Testament. It's really clear they're copying from Greek mythology. How that happened, nobody knows. But when you look at, if you really know Greek mythology, you'll see it all over the New Testament. When you see things like Jesus with a purple robe and a crown of thorns, when you see Jesus walking on water, Jesus crying tears of blood and water in the Garden of Gethsemane, you see him, what's the other one? Turning water into wine, riding on a donkey into town. I mean, you're just like, oh my gosh, it's like, and there's endless examples that have been brought up. Myth Vision is a great resource for that, by the way. The Myth Vision podcast YouTube channel. But Greek mythology is all over the place. To say Christianity is not as good as Greek mythology, it's just different flavors of the same thing. Maybe the Greeks were more flamboyant in certain ways, and maybe the Jewish authors, at least the Jewish influences, kept it in a certain vein that wasn't as nasty. But there's still some pretty nasty stuff in there, especially when you look at the ways that there's a lot of evidence now that the Old Testament was written much later than people thought, and the Greek mythology is actually woven into that. As ironic as that sounds at first glance, as weird as it sounds at first glance, that Greek mythology is woven not just into the New Testament, which has always made sense to us, but it's woven into the Old Testament, and that the Old Testament was written far later than we thought. That's an interesting topic. Let's see here. Accidentally Agnostic says, Ali Bree, I'm sorry, my mom is actually interested to hear my story, but I'm kind of scared to share too much. If I sway her, her whole life will come crashing down. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. The knowledge that the knowledge of the path that we've taken and how much it can hurt, how much it hurt us, to foresee how much it could hurt those around us, and to say, wow, if you go down this path, your crash is going to be much more painful, especially for those who have doubled down and even been obnoxious to us, to say, you're not only going to have to deconvert, go through that process, you're going to have to eat crow substantially, because you then defended yourself and were a bully to me, and now you're on my side. You were a bully to me for so long, and now you're agreeing with me. The irony is not lost, but also you're going to feel bad for what you've done. their lives will come crashing down. Let's see here. Invisible Jesus says, my wife is still a delusional believer, even though I got her out of the JW cult. Often she expects me to believe irrational things like the medical system is all a lie and people only get sick because they believe the lies the doctor told them. Yeah, that's stuff. Sometimes the anti-vax stuff can come into those discussions. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways in which that is true for so many of us, and I'm so very sorry. I hope that you're able to find, like we talked about, some of the common ground. Just build on it. Everything from certainly just the beauty of romance, the beauty of friendship, the beauty of physical intimacy. So many ways in which you can do things. Going out on dates, let's go out to watch a movie, take a walk in the park. Hopefully you can just build on so many good things that are out there to do to build it up, and try to keep the harder conversations at bay for the most part. Miss I says, does everyone in the chat believe we are animals without a soul? I don't know if people respond to that. I assume they did. If you're asking me, I would say yes. That's a firm yes. We are animals without a soul. I definitely would agree with that. Let's see here. Accidentally Agnostic says, I don't call us animals. I don't like that. I get by accepting the mystery of my existence for now. Yeah, I can see why people wouldn't want to be called animals. I would have no problem with it, but yeah, definitely, protect yourself for whatever feels like the right way to describe that. I would say we're heavily evolved animals, but we're still primates, which are animals. Day of the Jackal says, our existence is a beautiful mystery. Christianity has always been a terrible explanation for the mystery of life. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. That should be a whole discussion sometime. I love how sometimes you all give me such great ideas, and I just kind of put them on the list of, I think about that and add notes to it, add bullet points for a while, and eventually there's enough to have a whole discussion. Danny from the blockchain says, I've been renewing my mind since I deconverted. I now have a personal relationship with Cheez-Its. Funny. Day of the Jackal, Christians are bullies who fancy themselves to be persecuted victims. Yeah. And that's a good point. I didn't think about that in my notes, but that's a good point, is that they're going to see themselves not just as right, but as victims. Great point. Carol Bingham says, hi, Tim. I have no friends, family, relatives, kids, parents, and neighbors who don't understand. I have no one to confide in at all. Yeah, Carol, my heart is broken for you and your situation, people in that. I know a few other people who've said something similar. We care about you as a community. We love you. We're so glad you're escaping and rebuilding your life, but it's so hard to be alone in this. It really is. If you're not plugged into some good Facebook groups, please reach out to me. I'm on Facebook at Harmonic Tim, and I think we're already Facebook friends, maybe. But again, I have a tough time keeping up with emails. I get so many emails a day. It gets to a point where I get dozens and dozens, and I've got time to answer about 5 or 10 max, and I get dozens a day. But if you haven't reached out to me already, please do. If you're not in Facebook groups, I can give you a dozen Facebook groups where people will love on you and help you. Even if you're just a fly on the wall, to understand that you're not alone in this. Accidentally Agnostic says, most of us were in the faith for decades and knew better than to mock, joke, and laugh. It fell apart somehow for us. I tell people my brain broke. Can't go back to Santa. Can't go back to Yahweh. Yeah, great way to put it. Star Child says, nobody questions the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah. Let's see here. John House says, when you experience God, your life and mind will change, but to each his own. So, John, I say thank you for joining us, and goodbye. Permanently. Let's see here. Carrie Ann Chrysler, you're capable of taking the wheel because you've been doing it for so far as you have been able. Yeah, a lot of us, that's a big thing, is to realize that every time we prayed and then things worked out, and we're like, God gave me strength. God got me through it. It's like, I got myself through it. It makes a big difference. Let's see here. Anne-Marie, religious trolls always have to throw a wrench in the conversation. Yeah, agreed. Day of the Jackal, being in church feels really gross. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it feels really gross. It feels so weird. And it's like, I can't believe I was part of this once. I not just went to this kind of place. I thrived there, loved it. I begged as it were. Let me be in church more and more and more. Excellent Agnostic says, I love the Bible and tried to follow it diligently. Then I realized it's man's work. Show me where to sign up to hear directly from God. Yeah, exactly. Fair to Midland says, when talking about Jesus and God, my husband tries to make me feel like I'm stupid. He rolls his eyes and belittles my belief that if there is a God, it's not the Christian God. So I usually shut down. Yeah. And that's a good agnostic perspective, just to say, I don't know if there's a God or not. I don't think there is, but I'm open to it. But I can clearly see it's not the God of the Bible. But I'm open to it. That's a good middle ground. I think I can agree with that. Let's see here. Day of the Jackal says Christianity is such a mind virus. Yeah, for sure. I think, what was it? The God Virus. That's a book, right? Yeah. Ali Bree says apostates unite. LOL. I like that. And Duck Command says, what's that? Saved apes and lost apes? Yeah. And there's an ape that died on a cross for your sins. Miss I says, I wish there was a very drastic, obvious difference between the saved and the lost. It would make things so much clearer, easier for belief. Yeah. Yeah. On many levels. Many levels. But I will admit, I do think that as you deconvert, that does actually happen. You realize that there are differences that you didn't see at first that do make it clearer and easier to say, I maybe didn't deconvert because of that difference, but that difference helps me to reinforce that this was the right choice, because I can see you all aren't, this is not good. There may be some really sweet people in church, but they're sweet because they're sweet in and of themselves, not because of Jesus. And they appear sweet because they're ignoring the cognitive dissonance that they're in. They're in a system where they're saying, I just love on you so much with the love of Jesus. And you're like, but your God stones people that aren't virgins and people that picked up sticks on Sundays, like genital mutilation. Are you kidding me? Like you don't see that. I just have love of Jesus. That's all that matters. It's all about that love of Jesus and today. Jerry Walk says, communication is key, and telling the other person what you're going through before enduring instead of after is important if you're taking a break from them. Cruelty. Yeah. Let's see here. Franca Wermuth says, I'm still in that state that discussions about faith at some point make me angry because they're stupid. So I have to feel it and get it out before I become unfriendly. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Know yourself is to know where your limits are, to say, I can take 5 or 10 minutes of it, or the conversation can go this far into this topic and that topic, but if it goes much further, I'm going to become a worse version of myself than I want to be. So let's just stop. That's a great point for any discussions. Duck Command says, this is the sad truth. My mother won't speak to me because I told her religion was made up. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I've heard that from quite a few people over the years, and breaks your heart. Just, this religious stuff truly is a family destroying thing. Jesus himself supposedly said, I've come not for peace, but to bring a sword and to divide families. And that's exactly what it does. Very, very true. See here, there's a few more comments left. I'm scrolling through quickly to see if anything stands out. Pardon me but we're almost at an hour and a half. I meant to be more like closer to an hour, so we'll wrap up here in just a minute. Tim, gray rocking is a good therapeutic tool as well. Yeah, agreed. If anyone doesn't know what that is, please look that up. But gray rocking is an important piece of this. Carrie Ann Chrysler says, my mom is 72 and I've been having the God discussion with her since 1996. She is agnostic now. That's great. Little steps. That's awesome. Very good news. Philip Grabler says, being a filthy apostate now in the eyes of Christians, it is hard because anything regarding Christianity sets me off big time. Yeah. And I predict that will change over time. You get to a point where you don't get offended at anything. And honestly, very, very little offends me at this point in terms of any discussions. They could talk about hell and Calvinism and Donald Trump all they want. Very little affects me. I'm not offended by almost anything, but that I've had to work to get there. But yeah, you have to decide for you what that timing is as to when you're okay with all those topics being in your face. And until you are, it's great to have boundaries. Very, very, very good to be aware of yourself and your triggers. Carrie Ann says, I often trigger when manipulative tactics are employed. Yeah. Once you see it and you're like, oh, I see what's going on here. You're being passive aggressive. You're being manipulative. You're being stealthy. You're trying to sneak something in, at the last minute. Yeah, we're done here. Philip Grobler again says, unfortunately, to be realistic, they and their beliefs are one and the same, just like sinner and the sinner's intertwined. I hear you. I think you're probably referring to the whole love the believer, hate the belief thing that I was sort of mocking their love the sinner, hate the sin thing. They're intertwined, but they're not. I mean, it cuts both ways. I hear you, but I don't think it's as simple as they're intertwined. Therefore, they're all that. I think a lot of it is just severe indoctrination. And a lot of it, too, is a lack of willingness to directly address the issues and more of a purposefully chosen ignorance. And I would say even about myself. I wasn't aware of so much about Christianity, but in terms of what it said, what it claimed, the atrocities of the Old Testament, there was so much that I just didn't know about. And I could have arguably easily had red flags, and I just never saw them that way. Let's see here, just a couple more and we'll wrap up. Philip again says, a lot of us are aware that a lot of them are just psychopaths on a leash. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And when you really get down to it, again, when you believe monstrous things long enough, you kind of become a monster. Accidentally Agnostic says, love your advice, answer them with half the effort that came at you, because it really is that simple for us. It no longer makes sense, and my brain broke. What else is there to say? Yeah, well said. Agreed. Amy Collins says, there is something odd though when I think of singing praises in heaven eternally. I actually feel claustrophobic, like a panic reaction. Yeah, I could see that. I never thought about it that way, but I could see that, Amy. That's a really good point. I could see a claustrophobic or some kind of just like, oh my gosh, I'm stuck, almost like what's that movie, the Stepford Wives, where like, how they're, and I think they're like robots, right? Where they're not even real women. But like if you could imagine a version of that movie where you were completely human, but they just like stuck a computer chip on you that made you act robotic, and there was a part of your brain that could still do it. Part of your brain's doing everything. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll just be a Stepford wife and do what I'm told. But there's a part of your brain that's like separate and just observing how you're being forced to do that. Yeah, you'd feel like you're in shackles, like you're in a straitjacket. Absolutely. Philip, again, many of them are bullies hiding behind religion. Yeah, very, very true. And let's see here. Bill asks, can you please provide again the name of the app you mentioned? Yeah, it's Luminate. Luminate. Let me make sure I've got the right spelling for that. And again, I'm not advertising it. Like they're not asking me to advertise for them. They're not paying me. It's just my experience. Luminate, Lumenate. Luminate. Luminate, all one word. Their app is really cool. And again, there's a few parts where it's like unlocked and you can pay for more to unlock it. But try the free ones, 10 or 15 minutes a piece in a dark room. Absolutely great idea. I love what they're doing with that. I think there's probably some technology things that'll change that for the better over time. But for where it's at, great app. Great use of technology. If it doesn't appeal to you, it doesn't appeal to you. But for those of you that it does appeal to, it can definitely calm you down very quickly. So I feel like I'm kind of already, I have a self-calming part of my personality. I don't really need to be calmed down, but sometimes it just definitely helps to have a little push there. Day of the Jackal, Tim, I was responding to the guy in the chat trying to tell us Christianity is not mythology. Gotcha. Okay, if you were responding to that John guy, I'm sorry, I did block him, but I'm sorry if I cut off that chance. Hopefully you're still able to write your comment, and maybe he can still see it. But yeah, I do want to keep this as a safe place. I don't want trolls in here. So if that's the person you're referring to. Out of time, heartbreaking is an understatement. Yeah, this is an heartbreaking situation. We're right at an hour and a half, so I'm going to cut it off there. I'm sorry, there's about another 40 or 50 comments I wanted to get through, but I gotta wrap up. But I do appreciate so much you all being here. Thank you so much for the great comments. I'm going to read through them here after we wrap up. There's more here, good stuff, and some of you have given me ideas for other live streams. So thank you so much for that. You all are awesome. If anyone feels like they can support the channel, there's all the ways to do that beneath the video. And I'm going to be doing 2 more live streams today. Again, one at 2 o'clock Eastern, how Christianity objectifies people, and an open mic at 7 p.m. if you want to come on camera, kind of share your heart for a few minutes. We'll keep it safe and we'll keep it short per person, but 5-7 minutes max per person. But if you want to, feel free. We'd love to have you. Anyway, thanks so much. You all have a great Saturday. Talk to you soon.